back in the day, things may have been different, but I think today's world, you have to assume you're on camera. But again, going back to that work ethic, if the kids knew I was working, yeah, I'm not doing their push-ups, I'm not, doing the sprints, whatever, but they knew I was doing all that stuff off the field, and I wanted them to work hard. It was a lot easier for them to work hard and put up with the things we put them through, the mental, the physical tests, whatever, because they knew we were working hard as well. So like you said, yes, they are watching.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to another interview of Masters of the Game. And today I get to introduce a man who a common connection of ours told me that he was an absolute legend. And I've gotten to talk to him over the last number of months about soccer, about coaching, about athletes. And now I get to have him on this interview today. So I'm going to go through and introduce him in a little bit and let brag on Russ a little bit as he listens here. But today I get to introduce you to Russ Plummer. Coach Plummer took over as the Hendersonville High School soccer program head coach in the fall of 1987 after several years with the National Soccer Powerhouse program at Indiana University. I'm an alum of Creighton University, and that's also another powerhouse soccer program that actually saw Indiana quite a bit when I was in school back in the day. But actually, while at Indiana University, I found this awesome. Right? The men's team won the NCAA National Championship and were finalists in '84 as well. He coached 33 years as both the girls and boys coach team, but he elevated Hendersonville to one of the premier high school programs in the state of Tennessee. And just to rattle off a couple of the different bullets and achievements, and we can go on and on about this, but 2010, he was named the NSCAA National Region Coach of the Year for the men, 3-time Tennessee State Coach of the Year for men, another Sports Writer Association Coach of the Year for women. He has 443 career wins in the men's program, 439 career wins in the women's program. I'm not even mentioning all the state tournament appearances, the state championships with the boys and girls as well. And he coached 3 high school All-Americans and over 100 college players. Listen, I could go on and on. He also has a stadium named after him. But Russ, I'll stop bragging for a little bit. Welcome. Thanks for taking your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This is so good. Well, I like to start these off with a pretty broad question, but when you look back at your coaching career, what's one of the greatest memories that you have?
That's a great question. And number one, I don't think you just put one memory, but probably some of the greatest things I have is being invited to weddings. Let them know, hey, coach, we just had our second child. Stuff like that. Like, the kids still care about you. The kids still want you involved in what's going on. Yes. There's a lot of great memories on the field, off the field, but just stuff like that in today's world makes you feel pretty good.
That's amazing. Well, so let's back up. When you look back at, you coached a long time, right? But like, what got you into coaching in the first place? Like, what was that kind of path where you knew I'm going this route and that's what I want to do kind of with my life? But talk me through that a little bit.
Well, you got to remember, I started coaching when I was 12, so I'm not that old. I'm not that old. I was one of those guys where I probably knew in elementary school I wanted to be a coach. My dad was very sports oriented. Growing up 2 hours east of Chicago, we're huge Bears fans. Believe it or not, we're still White Sox fans, even though they're having a year to forget.
Hey, they set a record at least.
True.
Not a good one, but they set a record.
No. It's kind of like when you hit that all-time high weight. It's not exactly a number you want to remember,
Exactly.
And he was always an Indiana University fan, especially basketball. So, again, just being around that, and again, from the time I grew up, the people that were coaching back then, Coach Knight, Indiana basketball, Coach Yeagley, Indiana soccer, Mike Ditka with the Bears in the 80s. I mean, there were just some very, very competitive and strong personalities that just it made it fun to talk about, made it fun to dissect, made it fun to strategize. I mean, it's just an unbelievable time period.
That's amazing. Well, and so your dad, was he a coach or he did not coach?
No, he was not a coach. He was one of those guys that, 5'8", nothing, was a good athlete for his time, but never went to college. But he loved athletics. he played athletics all through high school and in the Army, that type of thing. But that was just part of our life, My dad was a factory worker for probably 50 years, but he never missed a game. He would take vacation days just to make sure we get games or to be at games. And that was just our life. It was awesome.
That's so cool. Well, and I want to really dive into coaching at the high school level specifically, because you did it for so long and experienced such, great success. But when you look back and you think about some of the athletes you coached, like what type of athletes were your favorite ones to coach? Because I assume there were some that were like, not so fun. Others, you're like, you're perfect, like prototypical player. But like, what was like the perfect player like in your mind that you just enjoyed coaching?
Well, I think lots of times it gets overlooked. In high school, you're not out there picking and choosing who you want, especially when you're at a public school. You're pretty confined to certain areas, within your community, et cetera. So I don't want to say I like the challenge kids, but I like the kids who wanted to be challenged. I like the kids who wanted to be pushed. And we were very fortunate at Hendersonville. We had kids that were great in the classroom, great on the field, great in the community. So it made things somewhat easier, but they wanted to be pushed. They wanted to be at the next level, whether it be the best they could in high school or the best they could in college or whatever it may be. So that was, I like those kids who want to be challenged. And sometimes as a coach, the player who wasn't very good, but you saw those light bulbs come on, you saw progress being made, and they were never going to be great. But just to see that improvement, that's a lot. That's kind of what it's all about, to be honest.
That's a good point. Well, and so many questions just even off of that. I think one of the toughest things to do, and one of the, when you see the light bulbs go off, like you have these athletes who, like, just from a talent perspective, aren't going to, go to that next level, do stuff like that, right? And you want to develop them, things like that, but it can be frustrating sometimes to like have them on the field. Other players get frustrated maybe by those players as well. Like, how did you manage through like balancing like the top performers with kind of the other people on the team to make sure there was still that cohesion, even though, you're going to have those gaps in talent?
I think you have expectations. You have expectations both on the field and expectations both off the field. And you hold people to those expectations. And when you really have a good group is when the group holds each other to those expectations, both on and off the field. I give this example a lot. We were fortunate to have a player who made to the national team, U17 national team. And one of his greatest memories is playing high school. He wanted to play high school soccer. And because he wanted to play high school soccer with the guys he grew up with, the guys he played club with, et cetera, it just made the environment so much better. Yes, he was a lot better than a lot of the kids, but you never heard him flaunt that. You never heard him get on other kids for not being as good. He wanted to be around his buddies. And the times he had to miss because with the national team, it raised our level up another notch because everybody wanted to play and everybody wanted to show him that, hey, yes, you're good, but we're still pretty good without you. And it just created a great environment. But again, going back to my community, some of our best players were our hardest workers. And that made it easier for everybody else because, it's not easy when Johnny's over there slacking. Well, he's slacking, but why does he get to do that? Well, Johnny's busting his butt. Johnny's doing that extra time. Johnny's doing extra things that kind of picks up everybody else's game as well.
That's a good point. Well, that shows tremendous leadership. I mean, from this that national team member, right, at U17, because I think sometimes you can get in a locker room, or, and it's not that way, right? That
correct.
You can get people like other players talking down or talking trash about other players or talking behind their back or right in front of their face, right?
Right.
And I think that's such an important thing for these kids to learn, like these athletes to learn at every level, right? Of, a high tide rises all ships, as they say, right? And were some of the top players that you worked with, including this young man, was that just something ingrained in them, or was it something that you set the tone, like you said, of, we expect, every player to treat other players on the team like a certain way, or was it a combination of both?
I think it was a combination of the community that we lived in, the success they had before I arrived, and the way we took that success and continued it, and the people want to be a part of it. One of the things that I really relished, I didn't realize that I would at the time, but I really relished. We coached girls in the fall and we coached guys in the spring, and as you said, our records were about the same overall. The girls never won the state title; they were runner-up one year, but trying to be competitive, trying to be successful with both, having some of the same expectations. Yeah, you have to change a few things for, depending on the girl or the guy, but trying to have the same high expectations for both, they kind of fed off each other, which kind of helped create one big program as opposed to two separate programs.
Yes.
So again, that kind of helped. And as when I came, and again, expectations were set, success came, it just kind of raised everything. Okay, the next group wanted to be successful. The next group wanted to be successful. We had a couple of down years. We had a couple of years that didn't go as planned. But for the most part, they knew where that line was. They knew where we wanted to get. So it just helped drive everybody towards that.
Is there an example or two of some of the standards that you set that you'd be willing to share with us between girls or boys programs, what that kind of looked like?
Sure. And again, in high school, I was a believer that you can't play the same system year after year. Again, because you have different talent, you have different strengths and weaknesses. So we wouldn't necessarily always play the same system, but we had some, like we just said, same expectations. We were going to be on time. We're going to be organized. We're going to be very, very well prepared with our opponents. We're going to sit in the first or second row in the classroom. If we don't have certain grades, then we're going to go to extra study halls. We had certain conduct we wanted off the field in the community. So those things were pretty much the same both ways. So that, and again, with everybody kind of doing the same thing, that it made things a lot easier.
Did you have, I imagine you had circumstances where players were not following those rules?
Yes, unfortunately.
Darn it wasn't a perfect world, but how did you manage those? Because I think it's one thing, Russ, and you have talked about this offline, but like, it's one thing to say, like, I'm going to set high standards and define what those things are. It's another thing to actually hold the standards. How did you do it? And how did you kind of mentally work through, like, I have to make this decision. I have to.
Well, it wasn't like I was perfect every time. One thing I always try to do was I always consulted with administration. Okay, here's our standards, here's the expectations, here's what happened, here is what I think I should do, and get their feedback. That way, if things did go sideways, which they very rarely did, I had their back. But again, I think as long as you're consistent for the most part, as long as you, the kids know that, hey, no matter who gets in trouble, no matter who goes below those standards, it can be the same thing. I think it helps you immensely. I remember a year, and this is dating me a little bit, back when we had the answer machines at the house.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Being from Indiana, we went home for Christmas every year. One year I came back, I had 14 messages from different players. And it was very simple. Coach, had a situation we need to talk, click. And it just goes right down the line. I had 14 guys that were suspended for the first week of the season because of things that happened over a Christmas situation. And so you got 14 varsity players that are missing. So yeah, some different guys have to step up or whatever. But, people in the community goes, well, I think you're pretty smart because you're spacing those suspensions out through the first 2 or 3 weeks. I said, well, that just shows how dumb I am because I did it all at the same time. And that to people outside of our community, that kind of like, wow. But people inside our community, they knew that was what was going to happen.
Interesting. And I think this is the toughest thing coaches have to deal with, to be honest, like, especially in today's day and age. I feel like it's how do we set the bar and hold the bar, right? And it sounds like over time, right? I think sometimes we think like, I don't know, coaches just like wake up one day and they're all of a sudden like perfect and have got all these rules. It's like learning over time, right? At least I screw up a lot and I try to learn from it. But
sure,
you got to a point where you were like, these are the ones, right? And so we're going to be on time, sitting in the front 2 rows. Grades have to be a certain standard. Community involvement has to be this. I mean, because you can measure those, right? And then
correct.
You figured out like, if they went against those things, then this is what's going to unfold or occur. Right. And not punishment, but just here's the next action that's going to follow. Right. Is that a fair statement that like that kind of evolved for you over time?
Yes. And I think any good coach will admit they don't know everything. I think all the good coaches beg, borrow, and steal from somebody else, and you pick things up through different people. I'm a big believer in mentors, and I even to this day, I consult with mentors, my mentors a lot. And again, the great thing about right now is it's not on the field stuff, it's off the field stuff. Whether we're talking politics, whether we're talking religion, or just talking about the family, whatever. I mean, it's a great resource to have. And again, just from a different lens right now, I don't think people today use mentors enough. And maybe it's just the people I talk to, but it seems like everybody thinks they know what's going on right now and thinks they have all the answers, but they don't get down and explore enough. They don't get down and ask questions enough. I think that's vital as a coach or a leader or an educator.
I agree. As many times I feel like I think I know what the right path is. And sometimes it's just as simple as talking to someone and being like, Russ, am I on the right path? And that it could be confirmation of like, yes. It's like, okay, now I can go. Or you see something I don't see, right?
And a lot of times it's, okay, well, what about doing this over here? And you may not think that's the right path, but at least you see a different direction. And what's right over here may not be the right path this time, but it might be the right path next time. So again, you're always broaden your knowledge, you always broaden your base to what's out there.
That's a good point. And I think when it's going like well, that's easy, right? It's sometimes those like holding the standards or making a difficult decision that having those people around you, it's like, don't make the gut reaction, but consult people first just to make sure you're on the right path, and then go and then have the conversation with the athlete or the parent or the administration or whoever.
Yeah, I saw a great statement the other day. What you allow in a win, you have to allow in a loss. Now, I think sometimes people overlook that. Well, we won, so it's all good. Well, you won, but there may be several things you need to get better at. And those things may happen when a loss. And now in a loss, people try and come down in those things. Well, you allowed it in a win. So what you allow in a win, not only on the field, but off the field, you also have to allow in a loss. And I think a lot of people get that confused.
Interesting. Yeah, it's the same standards throughout.
Correct.
Win, lose, draw.
Correct.
That's the way it has to be. That's so interesting. So let me ask you this a little bit, because I think motivating athletes is a big topic of, to your point, like there's differing talent levels. There is different lengths of time they've been playing a sport. There's off the field stuff that's influencing, like all sorts of stuff going on. What are some things you've done in the past to like at least understand, like, how do I motivate an athlete? Was it, I'm going to motivate everyone the same way? Was it very individual? Like, how did you approach like the motivation of athletes?
I was very much a team guy, probably almost to a fault. Mm-hmm. I wish at times I could have done more with the individual, but again, you're kind of limited in your time and your resources. I would go to a lot of clinics, a lot of coaching sessions, and these college coaches, they would have 5 assistants and 5 managers. They could do all the stuff that a coach and his assistant coach couldn't do. So again, you have to modify things, but we were very team oriented. So I think everything we try to do is team based. And I was a big believer that your team took on the reputation and took on the example of the coach. And again, with my background coming from a Coach Yeagley, being around Coach Knight, different guys like that, everybody was so competitive. But it wasn't always their competitiveness, but they were a hard worker. They were an endless worker. And I give a lot of credit to my wife because she allowed me to do a lot of things that normal people wouldn't be able to do. But I would go and watch a team play 2 or 3 times before we play them. And maybe some of the local teams are real good, maybe more than that. I would watch film. And I think as your team sees that, I think that rubs off on them. And I know a lot of people would say, well, coach is doing this, this, and this. I got to make sure and you do my end of the bargain. And I wouldn't do it for those reasons. I just do it because I felt that's what I had to do. But I think over time, your kids realize what you're doing. I think over time, your kids realize how important it is. And again, I live in a great community where soccer was important to them. So again, it wasn't like we had to to instill that in them. It was already important to them. So the motivation thing was more of a team thing. They didn't want to be the one to let the team down. They didn't want to be the team that let the program down. So it's almost like a self-evolving motivation.
Yes.
But, it's like anything else. That's one thing I loved about high school sports. You're with the kids every day. You're with the kids all day long. So you kind of know the mood of the school. You kind of know the mood of the environment. Whereas a club situation, only being around them, 3-4 times a week,
Yep.
you don't know what happens at school. Being at school, sometimes they're more free and sometimes too free to share what goes on at home. So again, I think you get more of the whole environment with the kid at school, which again kind of tends how you go about things the next day. Personally, I tried very hard. No matter how good or bad the day before went, every day was a new day. We may have really got spanked the day before. Well, tomorrow's a new day. Yeah, we got to work on this. What's a new day? Let's get after it. And I think with that new day approach, that helped everybody else. Okay, yes, we're not happy with what happened, but let's start over to a certain extent. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Well, your comment before about like they're hard workers, but also endless workers, I believe was the phrase you used, right? Where it's that continual improvement. So yes, we're deciding to have a fresh start today. Also, we continue to work. So there's
right. And just because it's a fresh start, that doesn't mean we forget everything that happened. But again, it's a fresh start. It's a new day, that type of thing.
Yes. So coming from Indiana, like Bob Knight, you bring up him. He's
otherwise known as God's country. It's God's country. Just everybody knows down here. God's country.
I thought I was in God's country in Colorado right now, Russ. So
you're mistaken. You're mistaken.
So in growing up in God's country in Indiana University, like Bob Knight's classic example of a demeanor that's like has some stories behind it, right?
Sure.
Of the way he coached and his temper, things like that. And then you have other coaches who are like super calm. How would you describe like your demeanor on the sideline? Were you pretty calm? Were you heated? Was it a balance? Like, what did that look like?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of it depends on who you ask. I consider myself, I'm kind of like two different people. Off the field, I'm very happy-go-lucky. I want to have a good time. I want to get things done, but I'm pretty laid back. But once we step on that field, it's totally different. I would say intense is probably the best way to go about it. I was intense. I was intense that the kids knew I had their back. The kids knew I was all in with them, but I wasn't intense where I was like out of control. To me, there's a fine line there. And again, I go back to my different mentors that I have, and they all kind of showed me, but displayed for that me day after day. Coach Yeagley is one of the most competitive people I've ever met in my life. We could be playing gin rummy, and he wanted to beat the socks off of you.
Yes.
But again, he took that intensity to a certain level where everybody knew how it was, but he wasn't out of control. And going back to Coach Knight, and I'm probably biased, but I think Coach Knight knew what he was doing. Even when he appeared out of control, I really think he knew what he was doing. I'm not saying he was perfect, and he wouldn't say he's perfect, but I do think he really kind of knew what was going on, even though people didn't think it was going on. So yes. I think I would describe myself as just intense, very competitive and intense.
Well, I think it's because one thing I talked to a lot of coaches about, and you probably have these same discussions with coaches and mentors and things like that, is it's like, what do you want your demeanor to be on the sideline or court or bench or ice, like whatever playing surface you happen to be on, right? But what do you want that demeanor to look like? And when people are watching you, what are they seeing?
Right.
And it's, I don't think necessarily good or bad. It's just like, what do you want that to look like?
That's interesting because because the way I was, the family knew we don't talk to dad before the game, obviously during the game, and depends what happens. Sometimes not even after the game. But again, my daughter, she was probably 3 or 4, maybe 2, but she was pretty young. Well, there is a game where she was yelling for me at the fence. I mean, the whole game, just yelling, "Dad, Dad, Dad," and I didn't hear her. Well, I kind of heard that at home. I got home at night, from the wife, which I understand where she's coming from. But again, I just didn't hear it. But at the same time, the parents knew, hey, we don't talk to coach game day, good, bad, whatever, just leave him alone. So again, I think that's something that you have to set out ahead of time.
Yes.
I see some coaches, man, they're hugging people, kissing babies, whatever before a game. I just wasn't that person. And I'm not saying they're wrong, but that just wasn't right for me. But I think that's something you have to communicate to your program, to your parents, to your community, so they kind of know what's going on. But again, I think that's whatever's good for the other person. You have to. I think rule number one as a coach, you got to be yourself. I don't think you can totally mimic or totally imitate somebody else. You got to be yourself. I think a good coach will be themselves. Well, they'll take all those things from other people that they like and learned and make that in part of them. But you got to be yourself, number one.
That's a good point. Yeah, and I always be curious your thoughts on this, where I think people in general, and I make a very broad statement for a reason, right? I've told the story before. I try to teach my kids, different sayings and things like that. And I won't go into the story again, but one of the discussions I had with my son was, I said, if you have kids one day, and I hope all my kids do, but I said, there's a saying you're going to learn, and it's that your kids are watching. And I said, there's a big difference between the saying is not your kids are listening, right? They are watching. And it's a big difference, right? So I kind of told my son, like, if I tell you to do push-ups and you never see me do a push-up, what are you going to do? He's like,
Correct.
I won't do a push-up. I'm like, that's exactly right. So if I tell you to eat healthy and I'm shoving another donut, my third donut in my mouth, like, donuts aren't bad and everything in moderation. But if I'm having my third donut of the day, it's like, he's going to look at me confused of like, you tell me to eat healthy and I have a carrot and you're shoving donuts in your mouth, right? I'm confused. And he's going to put donuts in, like he's going to eat donuts. And I think when we're coaching, and this is just leadership in general, I think, and this is true of athletes, anyone, we don't have to be like worried of what people are watching, but it's kind of, let's be aware of like the people are watching. So how do we just be a good example or be the best example that we can? Know that we'll make mistakes, things like that, but how do we be the best example? Do you agree, disagree with that? What did you see from a soccer coaching perspective?
Well, I think in today's world, you have to assume that you're on camera 24 hours a day. I mean, that's just the way we live, or the environment we live in anymore.
Yeah.
Back in the day, things may have been different, but I think today's world, you have to assume you're on camera. But again, going back to that work ethic, if the kids knew I was working, I'm not doing their push-ups, I'm not, doing the sprints, whatever, but they knew I was doing all that stuff off the field and I wanted them to work hard. It was a lot easier for them to work hard and put up with the things we put them through, the mental, the physical tests, whatever, because they knew we were working hard as well. Yes. So like you said, yes, they are watching, but I do think any coach, any educator, any leader has to assume they're on camera 24/7.
Yep. And even your point, even if not a physical camera, like people are creating memories in their brains. So pay attention. I think it's so interesting. Okay, so let's talk the mental side, because you just mentioned that about the physical test, the mental tests, things like that. Obviously, you know what I do, like building the mental toughness of athletes. And I think it's such a critical component, right? And, making sure they're confident and they are focused, they have the emotional control that they need. How do you view like the mental side, and how did you guys kind of work on that in the past through some of these tests, like physically, mentally, whatever? Walk me through kind of how your approach to the mental side, if you will.
I guess our approach was more of a common sense approach. Example, our trainer was very big on taking ice baths after overtime games, especially during tournament time when you're playing, twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. He was huge on ice baths, and it got to the point where the kids, I don't want to say looked forward to it, but they knew that challenge was coming, and they knew if they could survive, X number of minutes in the ice baths, they would be ready for the next one and could survive whatever's coming up next. So even though it wasn't a quote unquote written mental test, that was a huge mental test for them. Mm-hmm. We, especially during preseason and during the season when we have maybe 3 or 4 days for the next game, we would really get after it. And we wanted to get after it in practice. So our training sessions were tougher than maybe what they're going to face in the game. But again, it was that mental side of, well, hey, if we can get through this training session, X, Y, Z, it's going to be a lot easier. So it was more of a common sense type thing. I think one of the biggest things that the kids today and coaches, they miss out on is the communication. I started doing this late in my career. In fact, my daughter, when she went and played college soccer, they did, and I kind of stole it from them. We would fill out what we called a post-game report, and they could do it on their phone, and it'd be emailed to me, and there'd be, like who did we play, what was the score, weather conditions, field conditions, what did you feel we did well, what did you feel you did well, and what do you think you need to work on, just general things. And I told them, hey, look, that's just between you and I. And then there was a section at the end where they could write anything they wanted to write. And a lot of times what they write at the end would spur a conversation between me and her or me and him to talk about things one-on-one, which I thought was great. Unfortunately, today's world, kids are a lot quicker to type it, text it, email it, whatever, than they are face-to-face. But
Yes.
what we try to put both of them together. Okay, the initial thing can be an email, but after that, we're going to have that face-to-face. But again, I think it's helping the kids down the road. They're going to have face-to-face interview for job interview or face-to-face interview, somewhere down the road where they need that interaction. So
Yes.
I think the approach we took is more of a common sense approach. Yes, we might use this test over here or that test over there just to get some feedback, but wasn't anything major. And again, you have to remember, our high school season is so short.
Yeah.
With the girls, we do stuff during the summer, but basically you're talking a 9-week season. Same with the boys in the spring. So you have to do a lot in those 9 weeks. You kind of have to pick and choose what's important. And like anything else, what's most important this year may not be most important next year. So there's always a balance there.
I love all that. I think the ice baths, I just did a cold plunge yesterday. We have one in our basement with this little chiller thing. And you want to talk about a mental toughness test, go stand in front of that thing and make your decision to get in or not.
Right.
But I love that though, because again, you're a team guy, right? That's what I love is it's like the team doing it together, right? Let's do it together.
Yes.
Like here it's set up, like let's go. It's recovering together. It's bouncing back together. And that's a heck of a lot more fun than me standing by myself downstairs yesterday afternoon being like, do I really want to do this right now? But to do it anyway, I think it's amazing. I love that feedback of going through the game and like sending that email. I think that's huge. I love that idea because I love so much about it. Just like you're teaching the kids to analyze the game. You're making them communicate more effectively. And to your point, now I can have a grown-up conversation kind of, right? Because we're talking about like young adults here. Now I can have a grown-up conversation of like, well, when you wrote this, like, what did you mean by that? Or I agree, or this is the way I saw it. Like,
Sure.
it's so impactful. And you did that through email.
Right. And again, because I was so team-oriented, I really tried to speak to everybody individually every day. And sometimes that didn't work, just because of everything going on. Sometimes training sessions longer, shorter than others. But again, like you said, it's one more piece of communication. The common thing today is, all right, you're unhappy with the coach. How do you go about it? And we had the process, okay, unhappy with the coach, it's player coach first, not parent. And if the parent called me first, I said, well, I haven't heard from Johnny or I haven't heard from Sally. I'm hearing from you. And I wouldn't necessarily hang up on, but I'd very politely say, look, I need to hear from them first. And I would tell the parents in a parent meeting, I'm not this big bad bear dude that everybody's scared of. And if your son or daughter is scared of me, then there's problems, because we need to be able to communicate. So we'd have that communication. And then if we couldn't get things resolved, then it's the player, parent, and coach. And if things couldn't get resolved there, then it's the player, parent, coach, and administration. And that helped a lot. It helped the players talk more. And it kind of gave some parameters to the parents, like, well, I'm just not going straight to the administration. I'm just not going over this head. They had to go through the system. And again, the administration knew that, so they kind of backed that up as well. And very rarely did we ever have player, parent, administration. Very rarely at all. So again, a lot, as you said, the mental thing, a lot of it's just back to plain and simple communication. And there would be times when we'd have to agree to disagree. And a line that I would use, okay, you think this, I think that, prove me wrong. But prove me wrong every day. Not just when it's good for you. Prove me wrong on a consistent basis that you should be playing as opposed to Billy, or you should be playing over Sally. But prove me wrong consistently. That's so I kind of challenge them with that. So, but that did work for the most part. But again, you're always going to have disagreements,
Right.
That's just part of athletics.
Right. Well, I think playing time is one of the biggest ones.
Sure.
Where you see disagreements. And again, I'm a parent of two girls and a boy, and we get heated as parents, right? Of like, my kid's great and he or she should be playing over that other person or getting more playing time and stuff like that. And my gut reaction's always been like, let's go talk to the coach. And I don't know what it is, but I never cross that boundary where I will, my focus is how do I empower my kid to go have a conversation? I'll text the coach if I need to, depending on their age, and say, hey, can my son or daughter talk to you? When they're 10 years old, 12 years old, like
sure.
They have no other way to do it. But it's like, how do you empower your kid to have that conversation? Did you have pretty blunt conversations with people? Because this came up like in a different interview with this collegiate volleyball coach where, kids want more playing time. And her comment was like, sometimes the reality is as coaches, we have to just tell the truth. And she told a story about how this kind of player wanted a shot at this other position. And she had to flat out say no because and gave the reasons, right? That, the system they run and just the way this player was playing, stuff like that. Right. But that can be tough to deliver like blunt news, because at least for me, I want to be like, oh, if you keep working hard and stuff like that. And I don't know, how do you work through that?
Well, I think as a coach, you have to be honest because, you can say what you want, but players read you pretty well. Players know those guys that are into it, those guys that they can trust, those guys that care about them, and they know the guys that are just there. So the players pick up on stuff. And like you said before, they watch a lot more than what we give them credit for. And they watch a lot more than just the X's and O's, the mannerisms, Well, dang, we scored 2 goals and coach never got off the bench and cheered or we're up 3-0 and all the second team's in, but coach doesn't even pay attention. He's over there joking with the first team. I mean, players realize that stuff. And I know that's kind of negative stuff, but they realize that stuff.
Yes.
So you have to be honest. I refer it to like a player wants to play for College A. If you lied to College A, you just lost all credibility, not only with College A, but everybody College A knows. So you have to be honest. And I think you have to be honest with the players. With the players and the parents, I would never talk about Johnny versus Billy. I would never try and bring another player into it, and I wouldn't let them bring another player into it. But I would go back to, well, if Johnny wants to play more, he has to do this, and this. And like I said, prove me wrong every day. But I wouldn't let them compare players because every player is different. Even if they play the same position, they're different. But, maybe Johnny's playing the last 10 minutes of the game because it's rainy, it's muddy, and he's a mudder, and he can win hand balls, and he's tough defensively, whereas Billy's more offensive minded. So he's gonna play the last 10. So again, you have your reasons, and in today's world, you have to be able to give those reasons. I think the day of the coach saying, well, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and I'm the coach, and that's it. I think those days are over. And I'm not saying there's good or bad. It's just a totally different environment, a totally different world we live in.
Yes. No, you're right. And I think any leadership position, right? Even take this outside of coaching that's the toughest thing, that to have that honest communication, especially when it kind of hurts, right?
Sure.
Sometimes it's nice to be like, yeah, prove me wrong. And they prove you wrong. You're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, you did it. And there's other situations where it's like, as much as you work, it's just going to be tough. Well,
and going back to my own life, when I was in high school, our basketball coaches changed. And again, I'm 5'8" nothing, so it's not like I'm any basketball superstar. But our coaches changed, and I went from being a shooting guard to now being a 6-man point guard defensive specialist. And I remember going home for about a week and just complaining. And finally Dad goes, look, you're playing for coach, and he wants to do this. Either shut up and play or go do something else. We're not having this complaining. And that said a lot to me right there. Is like, look, and even though my dad may have agreed with me, I decided to play an activity. I decided to play a sport. Do what the guy says, So, I mean, that spoke a lot to me. And I would use that conversation a lot in parent meetings I'd have, I'm not saying that you have to agree with everything the coach says, but support them. And
Yes.
unless they're just doing some ethically, morally wrong, support the coach.
That's a good point.
Unfortunately, in today's world, with the way kids go back and forth different schools, they may play for different schools every year, especially on the college level. It's a totally different environment from what we had back in the day, as you said.
Yeah, it truly is. Well, I think, again, as parents, it's like, how do we prepare our children to be successful, right? And teach them some of these things. And
I
knowing
think
that
part of that preparation is failing. Part of that preparation is adversity. Part of that preparation is going through tough times and figuring the correct way out of it, which sometimes in today's world isn't always there.
Yes, it's so very true. Yeah, the ability to handle adversity, not get what you want. It's such a key skill set to learn. At least I've done it, and it's those times that have benefited me the most. And every athlete, every coach I talk to, that's the biggest benefit. And it's not fun going through it necessarily.
No, but I think as you go through it as an athlete, that helps you so much in the real world.
Yep.
Which again, that to me, that's kind of one of the main attributes of athletics is to help you in the real world. You know, do you have that thing inside of you that makes you want to be on time? Do you have that thing inside that makes you want to be organized? Do you have that thing inside that makes you want to be a team player, no matter what environment you're in? Those are attributes which I think are life lessons. Which again, that's a lot more important than the wins and losses. It may not seem like it at the time, but down the road, those are much more important.
Yes, so very true. Well, and I'll be aware of your time here. Kind of one last question I'll ask, because being like a varsity coach, right? You have, different coaches underneath you, right? And some are assistants coaches on varsity, yes. But I'm talking like also then you have junior varsity, sophomore, freshman teams, and every school is very different, and how many teams they have and all those sorts of things, right? But I'm just curious, how did you kind of also set the tone for the coaching staff, for those assistants and the other levels? How did you approach that? Was it letting them kind of do their own thing? Was it, no, this is the program standard, and then have your uniqueness underneath? Sure. But like, these are the program standards. How did you kind of look at that so that as the players progressed and got to that varsity level, they were kind of like ready for you, if they will?
Well, again, I said every place is different. 33 years, guys and girls, so that's 66 seasons. I think I'd have to go back and get a definite number. I had maybe 20 assistants. And a lot of times the assistant would also be with the girls and the guys. And let's just say the number is 20. I think all but 3 of them were former players. So in my world, that helped immensely because they've been through it. And when Johnny started complaining, or when Sally, started doing whatever, they can just pull them aside and say, "Look, I've been there. I was there. I went through it. I played for him. I know what it's all about." And that helped immensely. As far as letting them be their own person, when I would let them coach the JV, yes, we're still going to have the same characteristics, the same expectations. But if they want to play a totally different system, go for it. Again, that was their time to develop themselves, whatever. But we're still going to have the same characteristics, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
And again, I wasn't a big guy, and we had to play a certain formation, but I wanted the guys to be organized. I wanted them to, to care. I wanted to have the strong sportsmanship, that type of thing. So as they were coming to high school or the varsity, they knew what was going on. But having those people as assistants that were former players, that just helped things flow in us very, very well.
Yes. I love that. Love that. Yeah. So the standards there again with your uniqueness in how you coach and systems you run, things like that.
And I think that spoke a lot to the kids too, that look, coach, even though he's hardcore, even though he's intense, he's got people coming back that still want to be part of the program.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I enjoyed is when alumni would come by practice, I always made sure if they were there at the end, they would have an opportunity to speak. And majority of the time they would say a lot of the same stuff, but just for those kids to see these guys from the past still cares enough to come out, be around it. Again, kind of helps what you're trying to do, kind of helps in the future.
That's so good. So good. Yeah. I imagine there's a few stories. We'll have to have some of your players on and get the real stories, Russ. No,
I don't know about that one. That one
cancel that interview. That's so good. But I love this conversation, and I know we're right at time, and I just want to be kind of aware of that. I mean, there's so many different questions to ask, but I think you said so many powerful things, but just that standard, the team environment, like how do you create that? How do you create similar experiences, right? And consistent experiences with like the ice baths. I'm not saying everybody has to go buy a cold plunge, system or whatever, a bunch of ice, but it's in just your approach of like, how do we make practice really challenging so the games almost seem easy, right? And that's the mentality. Parent communication, all sorts of stuff. It's just, I love this conversation, Russ. I love it.
Well, thank you.
From God's country.
There you go.
Colorado.
Right.
No.
Right. Yeah, no.
I had to throw that in there at the end. Well, Coach, thank you so much. Just
Enjoyed it.
Truly appreciate it. I get to hopefully meet you in person one of these days, hopefully sometime soon, and get to shake your hand and formally thank you for being part of this interview today. But I just can't thank you enough.
Look forward to it. That'd be awesome.
All right. Everyone listening today, first of all, thank you for taking your time with Coach Plummer and I today. Please share this with your friends, share it with your coaching staff, share it with the players that you coach. If you are a player listening to this, write down one or two things that you learned from a player's perspective of maybe how to approach your coach and how to do things differently, or maybe how to provide feedback after games as well. We can all learn from this, so please share it. And let's spread the message of Masters of the Game. Thank you all, and we'll see you on the next episode.